me. Do you mind if I join you? Are you sure you don't mind? You're absolutely sure I won't be disturbing you?
Hello and welcome to the Mental Suppository. I'm Bret M. Herholtz. My guests today are author Mark Kneece and cartoonists Brian Nelson and Bob Pendarvis, who are going to not only talk about their own work in comic strips, they're also going to talk about the comic strips that have inspired them as well. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
And I feel like comic strips have kind of developed a stigma of being just basically a knock-knock joke, with the first panel being like the beginning of the joke and the last panel being the punchline. And most people don't realize nowadays most cartoonists' ambition was to have a syndicated strip. People got into, back in the day, people got into comic books in hopes that they would have their own syndicated newspaper strip someday. I mean, a good example of that is Will Eisner's Spirit. He started out with in comics and moved on to his own comic strip section. And even when I was a kid, I remember being very young and wanting, being a
Jack Kirby.
That's true. Yes, absolutely. And I just remember being a kid and having this ambition of wanting to be a newspaper, having a newspaper strip. And this was probably around 1989 when the whole idea of being in a newspaper strip was starting to fade into oblivion as an art form. But a little bit of history for
newspapers.
Yeah, exactly. And so a little bit of history for the listeners out there. Mark Kneece and Bob Pendarvis are both my former professors at the Savannah College of Art and Design, where I actually learned a lot about writing and creating comics from both of them. So,
Mostly from Mark.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a little while. But
Are we still on the air?
We're still on the
we're
air.
still on the air.
But I figured I'd go around the room alphabetically and start off with Mark. But Mark, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you've worked on. You come to this from a unique perspective, being a writer working with an artist, Gray Morrow, on Tarzan, which I feel like is a strip that you can't get more of an established character than, say, maybe Flash Gordon or like the Phantom. Tell us a little bit about like working as a writer with an artist on a syndicated newspaper strip.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I did that for about a year and a half. I remember doing that for about 18 months. It was I ran into Amy Lago, who was the editor at United Media, and she said, "We need a writer," because for some strange reason they couldn't seem to keep a writer on that strip. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll sure. It sounded great. To be honest, I mean, writing a character like Tarzan, I mean, man, Tarzan goes back to Hal Foster and the early days of comic strips. Back when, I mean, Tarzan in its heyday was a full page, had the size and the color, and it was great, beautifully drawn. The strip that I was writing, though, was not that size.
No.
It was quite a bit shrunken down from that. The first thing that I did, I mean, I had been writing comic books. I'd written, Batman and I don't know, some other things, Hellraiser, I don't know, stuff like that. But
I still have a copy of that Batman Viking Prince you signed for me. I do.
That's you keep that. It's going to be valuable one day.
No.
But anyway, no. But I mean, the thing is, like, it took some adjusting for me to figure out how to write for a comic strip, because the very first thing I did was I filled up all the panels with important information, which I found out was wrong. That was, because I thought that the strip had 6 panels. That's what I was told. You're gonna, you write this each week. You write a new installment, and the way this works is that I would write. This is a serialized story, which, it's interesting. You're talking about how the strips nowadays tend to be mostly gags. There's
Right.
3 or 4 panels and then a punchline at the end. Well, this was an ongoing story, which, that was great back when you had, I don't know, a full tabloid-sized page to deal with. But when you've only got 6 panels, it's a little harder, because you have, to progress the story from week to week. It's a little bit tedious. And so naturally, wanting to use all the room I had, I filled up all 6 panels with important storytelling information. The first thing that happened to me was I sent in that set of strips. I think the first one I did was 12 weeks worth of strips. Basically, I just write the whole story, and I'd break it up into, weekly installments. 12 weeks worth of this in, Amy Lago got hold of me and said, "What are you doing?" she said, "You realize you put all this stuff in the first 2 panels?" And I was like, "Yeah, so isn't that what you're supposed to do?" And she said, "No, the first 2 panels, you have to allow for the fact that some newspapers will actually cut those off and toss them."
Yeah.
For space. I mean, they actually won't even put the first 2 panels. And so I was like, oh, great. And so I had to go back and redo that whole set of, strips, the scripts that I'd done, and take all of the important information out of those first 2 panels. And it would just simply be, I don't know, Tarzan swinging through the jungle for a couple of panels or something. Until Tarzan got where he was going, and then he would say, "Oh, I need to deal with this thing here. Let me talk to my friends." But so it was an eye opener. My illusions about all the things that I was doing kind of were pared down. Well, they were pared. They weren't shattered. They were just pared down a bit.
Right.
So, but it was a great learning opportunity, because I learned a lot about, I don't know, compression, about how to fit things, how to kind of simplify things but still to keep it interesting. It was kind of tough. It was really fun too, because and I have to admit I'm being a little bit sarcastic when I say fun, because I had never met Gray Morrow. I mean, I never met the man. I wrote for him for all those months and never really but I got the impression he liked the stuff I was doing. I mean, it was fun, and he did a great job. I was always impressed with what he did with it. It always looked way better than I was picturing it. When I was doing these things. Gray was just such an incredible artist. I remember one time in particular that I was doing this Tarzan where, the storyline was that they were this movie company had gone out on location into Tarzan's neck of the woods, right? And they were filming this movie out there on location, and it was disrupting everything that was going on with the people in the villages and the people living around. And it mostly because the main director had brought some children along.
Oh God.
Their kids. And so I don't know, it was all sort of interesting. Yeah, the kids had to learn some valuable lessons about, respecting, where they were and that kind of thing. But what I was getting at is what Gray Mario did one time, which I thought was, was funny. It was kind of touching, but at part of in the prop trailer that they had, there was all kinds of paint, because they would, need to paint backdrops or buildings or whatever it is. But what I thought was really fun about that is that Gray went and took all those cans of paint and called it Kneece Paints. This is all of like Kneece Paint Company paints, and I was like, oh well, that was nice of him. It's kind of an inside joke, but I'm sure nobody got it because probably most people were totally unaware that I was even writing the name. My name was in there somewhere, but who looks at that? But anyway, I don't know. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting working with Gray, writing for somebody that I had no idea what this person wanted particularly, and so I just kind of had to do my best. And I think that I kind of developed a silent rapport with Gray. But, I would hear back through Amy, the editor, what Gray thought about stuff. She was like, oh, he really liked that story you did with the Neanderthals in it because he really likes, doing stuff like that. And I was like, oh, cool, and somebody told me he really likes drawing horses. And so, I try to put horses in, just throw chunky things in the dark. But no, I mean, it was really a lot of fun. Ultimately, I just, I couldn't keep up the pace.
This was a daily strip, right?
Strenuous job of coming up. I mean, just coming up with those stories, like 12-week stories and 17-week stories, like,
I can imagine.
time after time. I don't know. It's started to burn me out a little bit. I liked cards, and I still do. When I started writing that strip, I think Amy told me that it was appearing in 3 papers in this country, 3 newspapers.
Oh, wow.
Although she said it was very big overseas in the UK, it was very big. But that here, not so many papers were carrying serialized strips anymore. So Tarzan was kind of like falling a little bit. By the time I got through, it was only in 2 papers in this country.
Oh, wow.
So I'm sure that's because of me.
No, I don't think it was a criticism of your writing ability. That's
no,
for sure.
Continuity strips have a hard time of it. I usually see them in the classifieds, like in the Boston Herald for like the Phantom. It's like you don't see a continuity strip so much anymore than I've seen on a comics page. It's like, again, it's like gag a day. Oh boy, do I hate my job. Yes, Dilbert, thank you. That's it. Move along.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really hard those. Yeah, it is. When I was a kid, I remember there were a bunch of those strips in the paper.
Sure.
Canyon and Gandhi and Mandrake the Magician. I don't know. Yeah. There were all kinds of strips in the paper that were serialized. But now the paper's been squeezed down so much that
it's a ghost of what it was.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I'll let somebody else talk now.
Okay, Brian. You
go ahead.
Okay, Brian.
Okay.
You create a Sunday.
Okay, Brett. Okay, Brett.
You create a Sunday comic for the Telegram and Gazette in Worcester, Mass. I feel like this is a comic that your comic doesn't. I feel like your comic doesn't follow a lot of the tropes of the gag a day strips, and you've actually created strips that educate a lot of people about history in Worcester, and with this great character you created. Well. And what I would like to
thanks very much.
You're very welcome. And what I want to know is, how did you come up with a character like Laurel, and what inspired her, and what led to her creation?
All right. Well, thanks for asking. Well, actually, what inspired it was a pair of eyeglasses. One of my nieces got a pair of glasses way back in 2000. I'll see if I can just find it again. My sweater blocking out the picture here. Maybe I can find the sketch. I have it right here. Anyway, back then, my nieces got a pair of glasses. She was about 9 years old for the first time. So I was working on a previous job as an editor, which is what I do full time, I'm fond of eating regularly, so I'm not working, as a regular strip cartoonist. But nevertheless, I drew this real quick picture, a doodle at work. Okay, there's Laura with her new eyeglasses, and this is even dated. I even had her name on it. So I just did this little sketch here just to get the character down. And so I figured I'll do a little girl with big eyeglasses. So I figured, well, wait a minute, I kind of like the way this character looks. Where can I go with this? So, but to try to be a diplomatic uncle, she had an older sister named Rachel. So you have a portmanteau name, and and her name is Laurel as a result. So that's how the character came up. So I figured, well, now I have this character, and I was drawing another strip for another publication at the time, and she made a cameo in that, and I figured I want to work with this character. It's like suddenly I got this, I liked the way the character looked, and it was relatively easy to draw. So this is around 2002. I started doing a strip that was accepted by this alternative paper in Worcester. And I was there for about 2 years or so, left on a matter of principle. The editor had none. And then I was just sort of freelancing Laurel, just putting it online. I created my own, I published some book collections. And then when I was on the Telegram at the time as a copy editor. So I figured around 2010, they were starting a series of weekly publications called Telegram Towns. And I asked the executive editor, well, would you mind if I drew the Laurel cartoon in there? And they said, well, we need someone to fill that space. Go ahead. And I've been getting away with it ever since. So here's an example of what Laurel looks like today. This is gives you an idea of what the character looks like now, if I can put her there with the glasses. And like a Valentine's Day cartoon. And this shows you about the actual size it appears in. It's like 3-column size. So that's actually a plus, because with that size, you can also do, well, you can't really see it too well here, but here's like one of the history strips, and you can do like, 2 or 3 tiers of action, or you can go like 3 tiers of action. So they gave me a decent space, but part of it is like, again, running continuity. All right, you've got the diamond mark play baseball. Now you got to work inside the shape. And with doing that, it lends itself so Laurel is just pretty much a Worcester girl, 9 years old. She's got a imagination and so forth. And I try to keep it as Worcester related as I can, because the cartoonists who really influenced me a lot. And I'll show you. I got a couple examples. This guy here, Al Banks, who is like this one-man powerhouse, the cartoonist. He drew for the Telegram for 44 years. Now, it's what he didn't draw. I mean, it's like he did a political cartoon, a midweek special. Let me show you one of his cartoons clipping. Now, you got to remember, back then a newspaper page was 8 columns wide. This cartoon here from around the 1950s, you really can't see, but I mean, it's a lot of detail. It's his midweek special. It's 5 columns wide on an 8-column newsprint page. Now, well,
hold on.
3 times the size of what you see on a comics page today. But you can imagine, even Phyllis, and I saw this, and I figured, damn, I'd love to do something like that myself. But I wanted to do something like a Worcester-based strip because, it's like, I mean, syndication does scare me for that reason, because, again, how can you do a strip like 365 days a year? I mean, Charles Schulz said it the best. A cartoonist is a guy who has to repeat himself over and over again without doing the same thing twice. And how he could do peanuts himself, 51 straight, and he did it himself too. I mean, I've seen his drawing board. It was practically worn down after like 3 layers, but the board was gone. He was just, he had this work ethic that was really, unbelievable. Not to mention, it's a strip that I just admire since it cuts across all levels. I loved it as a kid. I love it as an adult. And, it was just like no other strip before or since. So that's what I'm doing with Laurel. It's not so much like trying to do a continuity, except for like the history strips. So like one day a month, I'll do like, something on Worcester history. And we've got a fantastic historian by the name of Al Southwick, who really covers the waterfront there. He's 100 years old and still meeting deadline, and he's just this font of information. But I'm I just finished the strip, for example, years. in Worcester. And it's fun to go through the clippings file, go through the clippings file here, folks. And I'd see a story from 1966 on the anniversary. And, people lost their false teeth. They were so entranced by this film. The White City Theater found 4 sets of false teeth. It's like, so pretty much I'm given some liberty of what I can do. The editor, as long as I meet the deadline and fill the space above the TV grid, for the TV listings, everybody's happy. Yeah. So I really don't have to answer to an editor, for which I'm fortunate. I've never had a script turned down because I don't think they really care as long as he just gets a space filmed. But it's been fun to draw, and it's been an absolute education. It's like I have to like an absolute beginner every time I sit down. Like I finish a strip, great. Meeting this blank sheet of paper again, and all you have to do is fill in the blanks. So that's what I've been doing for the past 11 years and getting away clean.
I'm glad you brought up Al Banks. I don't know if Mark and Bob are familiar with Al Banks' work. Are you guys familiar with him?
No.
Why no?
Okay. No, it's fun. It's funny because Brian brought it up because I've been going through my grandfather's letters home during the war, and he actually, one of the things he wanted his mother to send him while he was over there with the Al Banks cartoons, because he would tell it. Oh. He would say to his folks, my buddies are. Think they're great. Think they're great. He's just such a hot ticket, using phrases from that time period. But it was just kind of funny to hear his names after reading the old letters from like 1943, 1944, talking about this cartoonist.
Wow.
Yeah. He was never syndicated. The only time I've ever seen a Banks cartoon outside the Worcester Telegram or the Evening Gazette was in Yankee Magazine. And I said he didn't have enough to do with the Telegram. He was freelancing. But that's when papers. And it's fun to go back over like old newspaper pages. I love looking at that stuff because every newspaper had maybe a sports cartoonist, and the sports cartoons are fantastic. I mean, that's where the comic strip really came to life. Like Bud and Jeff, it originated in the sports section of the San Francisco Chronicle. And a lot of cartoonists got their starts in the sports pages. But you had a sports cartoonist, editorial cartoonist, they were just like one for each. The Telegram itself had like about 3 or 4 on staff, and now it's all syndicated. And I'm just this imposter, doing this thing in the Sunday paper, getting away with it. But we don't have like a regular full-time cartoonist anymore. And I mean, I think they're like about last time I knew about 34 editorial cartoonists in all of the country, or maybe a little more than that, but it's less than 100. And that's the way the industry has gone, unfortunately. Yeah, it's really diminished.
That's a shame.
Yeah, cartoonists back in the day were during the time of Hearst and Pulitzer, and back in the 20s and 30s, I guess, were being incredibly well paid. The ones that were like really popular.
Yeah.
So
that's why Al Cap got into it. He said, "Well, Bud Fisher is marrying countesses and making like the equivalent of like $50,000 a week." So Al Cap started going into cartooning, and the rest. He did a fabulous job.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, Bob, I should mention right off the bat, you created the sequential art department for the Savannah College of Art and Design, and continue to teach workshops, been guests at Dragon Con in Atlanta, Georgia, and you continue to publish books on cartooning. You also advocate. You also advocate empowering women to be artists, or having there be more women artists in comics.
Yeah, I did. I do. That's all true. Is there a question?
No, just
I'm not.
And I actually have to confess, a lot of what I learned about structuring comic strips was from your class. And the reason I actually went to SCAD was because it offered a full sequential art department. Whereas a lot of the other schools.
I would have killed for one of those.
Yeah. Whereas a lot of the other schools around the country only had like certain,
one of the first things I did after a couple of years was went out and hired Mark Kneece, who hadn't started writing his famous Tarzan comic strip yet, but eventually he would. But I was like, man, this guy might be going someplace, so I hired him while I was at Dragon Con. It was in like 1992.
Oh, wow.
I think. Was it 92, Mark, or 91?
Yeah, it was 92. I was there with Bo Hampton. Yeah.
We hired him too.
Well, to be fair, you hired Bo Hampton first.
Yeah, well, actually, I was interested in both of you, but you weren't available for a year.
Well, right, yeah.
You know, we had Bo for a year, which I guess Bret, you never got to meet him. Did you ever meet
No,
Bo Hampton?
I don't think I ever met Bo. I met Scott Hampton, but I didn't
he
meet
was
Bo.
there. Yeah,
Hmm.
Bo was there for the first year, and he at the end of that first year, when we finally got Mark, and Bo quit.
Oh,
He's
wow.
like, I can't do this. This is hard as heck. You know, like, oh my God, and I mean, he was a very, very talented. He still is a very talented guy. But I think he thought he'd be able to keep painting graphic novels for DC or something, and also teach full time. And he realized, to his great horror, I can't do both of these things. And he was like, which one can I do easiest? You know, I can whip out a nice looking graphic novel. And so he was like, bye, Scat. And he told me, he said, you look, I've never heard of you, Bob. I was like, yeah, I'm nobody. I just thought there should be a major in this, and the school gave me a chance to do it. And he went, well, my advice to you is just keep doing what you're doing, because you seem to be doing it halfway well. I've never heard of you, and yet you're more popular than I would have possibly imagined. So I lasted about 18 and a half years, never having really done anything. And people are always like, well, what have you ever done? What's your famous comic? I'm like, nothing. But I somehow got the job done in the classroom. If you learn stuff, and the other kids learn stuff. But I'm always surprised when I hear students that are working at Marvel or DC or whatever company they're at, and my name will come up and say, oh yeah, I learned a lot from Bob. I'm like, you did? Really? Yeah. Okay. But I tried teaching a lot. And in fact, that's the thing. I learned that very early on, that if you're going to teach full time, then your chances of doing a whole bunch of other stuff kind of dwindle.
Right.
And unlike Mark Kneece, who was like, oh, I'm going to write the Tarzan comic strip and write movie scripts and do all kinds of stuff and teach full time. And he eventually figured that wasn't going to work out, didn't you, Mark?
What was going to work out? I stopped.
That was hard to teach full time and also work professionally as a.
Well, yeah, it is, because I mean, there's you only have so much headspace, and like if you teach full time and then you've got to go home at night and stay up and do other things, and it can get kind of tiresome. Like it wears you out.
But when we were creating the major, Mark and I, because I'd only been teaching there a couple of years, so I got Mark. Bo had drop ship, going, this is too hard for me. And I was like, maybe we're doing too much for the students too. And I eventually decided, no, we're actually right on track, because we had Comics Art Forum 1 right around that, when Mark came that first year. The first year Mark was there, we had Comics Art Forum 1, right, Mark?
Yeah, that was.
And we had people like Will Eisner and Scott McCloud. And, Mark Schultz, Mike
we had like 16 people or something show up. I forget what it was. It
was a huge amount. It was a 3-day weekend. But then we're asking them, like, say, do you like the looks of our curriculum? And they're like, yeah, you emphasize storytelling, and it's not about inking like whoever. Or penciling, like, remember what kind of pencils you use. We're like, get a story in your head, figure out what your story's trying to say in Mark's class, and then in my classes and other teachers' classes, now figure out how to say it, and figure out how to say it in as attractive a way as possible. And some of them wanted to be comic strip artists too. I actually, for the first few years at SCAD, I taught a comic strip class, and I had a whole bunch of people. Eventually, it became like in the grad class, you could be a syndicated comic strip artist or be published in books and stuff with your little comic strips. I'm like, feel free to do it in the grad class. And so I had a lot of students who were actually doing comic strips on a regular basis. And inevitably, something I noticed with them was that all these guys who wanted to do comic strips rarely were funny. Yeah, they were wanting to do funny, 3-4 panel comic strips. but they inevitably weren't funny. They were cute, they were adorable, or they were, kind of funny looking, but they couldn't actually tell a joke to save their life. And then, we critique them in the classroom.
Bob, wouldn't you say, Bob, that being funny in comics is like one of the hardest things to do? I mean, like you can be dramatic or scary or whatever, but funny is like really hard.
Well, people think they've got it done because they've got 3 or 4 panels drawn, and it begins, and then there's a little middle, and then it ends with something like a joke, but nobody really understood how to tell a joke. And then, I would explain people like Jack Benny and some of the great joke tellers on TV, or like Charles Schultz, my favorite comic strip artist, and people like that. And I'm like, think of a simple bit, and then a simple way to illustrate it, and you'll get the job done. They would spend a zillion hours drawing the darn things, and then I would have to read it in front of class, and I'd be like, well, there's nothing funny here. It's just pretty pictures. And then they'd all get mad at me, and they'd all hate me later. But like, Bob, what comic strips have you ever done? I read a lot. I enjoy a lot. I'm reading yours a lot, and I'm not enjoying them a lot. But you can't make someone have a sense of humor. That's I think you can try, but you can't make them do it. And they didn't like hearing that. Cause look, I'm the fastest artist here. I could do like 30, 40, 50 strips a month if I had to. And I'm like, how many are actually going to make people laugh at all?
Exactly.
Other than being like, well, that's a beautifully drawn strip, and it's lettered so nicely. And look at that background. I'm like, hey, let's check out a Charles Schultz background, shall we? Let's look at his earliest Charles Schultz backgrounds in the early days of Peanuts, where he actually used to put in backgrounds, and there's a whole neighborhood in the background behind Charlie Brown or whoever. And then you look at the ones from like the 80s, and it's like it becomes just a straight line.
Yeah.
Is that when his hands started getting shaky? Oh, we're still there.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah, my phone was acting weird.
Oh, okay, just wanted to make sure.
It was, no, but it was, long before then, by the late 60s, early 70s, he had already switched to like, I remember when I used to put in actual backgrounds. That was many years ago. Because he had a joke to tell, and he realized not a single person reading that comic strip gave a darn that like, well, I hope the buildings in that background look correct. He would just sort of go, there's a rectangle with a triangle on top. That's a house, I guess. And he would have let's say that Charlie Brown and Linus are walking around outside. I'll just draw a line on the ground and maybe a couple of pieces of grass. We're outside. Yeah. And that's all you needed. But they would say, but Bob, here at Scan, we're trying to teach the artistry of it. And you got to draw beautiful comic strips. I'm like, that won't be published by anybody. Trust me.
Yeah. You bring up a brilliant point.
But they'll be like, wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily brilliant, other than it was the right point.
No.
And that often isn't appreciated. And that's that's one thing I try to do a lot when I was teaching at SCAD. I would say, look, here's what you are trying to do, and here's what you actually need to be doing. And the cool kids who went on to become successful paid the difference. They were like, maybe I should be focusing on telling a story or telling a joke. And if I'm not good at it, maybe I need to be working with someone else. Like that's why you get a Mark Kneece, who's going to write a story for Gray Morrow to illustrate.
Looking for humor.
No. Well, but not all comic strips are funny. You can have a scary comic strip or a Mary Worth, soap opera kind of thing.
Right.
There's all kinds of comic strips, but they all wanted to do funny comic strips. I'm like, okay, make it funny, make me laugh. And I would always say, hey, don't worry, you're going to get an A in the class. You turned in a record amount of work. It's beautifully drawn. It's all on time, and none of it's funny. Yay!
Yeah,
congratulations.
I almost think sometimes that, like, to develop that kind of thing, that maybe people should pay more attention to, I don't know, like acting and drama and stand-up comics and performers, and because like you're saying, I think sometimes people get really hung up on the art, and they kind of forget that they're supposed to be actually entertaining people or something. And I mean, if you look at something like, I don't know, South Park isn't particularly brilliantly drawn. It is
Well,
what
these
it is. I
days
mean,
it
it is what it is on purpose, but it's hilarious,
Exactly.
because of the observations, because of what they're actually getting at.
Characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, like you mentioned Jack Benny before, there's a classic example, because early radio comedy back then was all catchphrases. You have, Joe Penner. Oh, remember Joe Penner, right? But Jack Benny realized early on, if he had a character, and even told Joe Penner and other comedians this, get a character, get somebody that maybe, again, now he's stingy, he's vain, all this. But Benny was smart enough to know that, again, if the joke will be on him, he'll build sympathy with the audience, and he has these people, just bound.
and it also gives you something to wait for. You're like, he's going to mention he's only 39.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and again, the character can drive the comedy. So one reason why I think he and other comedians that I admire, and I look at a lot of them, and I see what works and what doesn't. There was one silent comedian by the name of Larry Seaman. You all remember him. Of course you don't, because there's a reason why.
Yeah.
He used to be a cartoonist. Now, Larry Seaman would draw these amazing gags. Like Buster Keaton used to say, you can laugh yourself hysterical, but you won't remember the movie because how does it relate to the character? Whereas with Buster Keaton, he said it has to relate to the character. And if you have the character driving the comedy, chances are you'll be able to sustain a strip, because I think there's one fantastic book, actually several I can recommend, but there's a cartoonist by his name Ken Muse, who did these books for Prentice Hall on, how to cartoon and so forth. So he submitted a bunch of strips, just to give you an example, and they were all rejected by the syndicates. And one thing says the strip won't have enough legs. You're going to run out of material. And a lot of them were simply one joke strips. But his point was, get a character that will sustain the strip, as much as possible, because that way the character will derive from that. I mean, Charlie Brown, Charles again was, a master at that sort of thing. And how George Herriman could do, Crazy Cat, which is my favorite strip. All you need 3 characters, a basic premise, and the variations upon that strip were just marvelous. And Herriman just not only drew that, but other strips as well. The guy was, again, just phenomenal. But they're all based, and again, not so much on the gag, which is important, but the characters themselves can derive the gags. And even like when I tried to do with Laurel, how would Laurel handle a situation like this? And sometimes it works, sometimes it. I'm just trying to figure out if you use that as a starting point. So like you mentioned about acting and drama and so forth. It depends. Get your character down, and the rest will. And that's a good point, because then that's the way humor will come about. And believe me, it's like it's a never-ending story trying to figure out. And the research is fun, because I love looking at old comedies, but I'm seeing how do they do it. How does they make this work without you really knowing the mechanics behind it? And that in itself, and just
well, that's the early days of comic strips. You had all these characters who were like they're old hat to us now. But back then, it's like, oh, wow, a strip about a guy in the future, like Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers.
Yeah,
right.
And it's like, well, it was popular in the movies and in comic books, and comic strips, and it was, Dick Tracy. This is all like, oh, now it's a newspaper comic about a cop catching crazy criminals. And it was a brand new concept to them. But over time, over the years, you're like, well, gee, I've already read this. It was called Dick Tracy. Oh, well, I just thought I would do my own version of Dick Tracy. Well, we've already got Dick Tracy. So what have you got different? I'll have to think of something. And that's everybody say, I'm going to do a cat like Garfield. I'm like, good luck. There's only so many
like
cat
Garfield
comics we need.
It was Heathcliff,
Well, there's Heathcliff.
Heathcliff, and he said, I came first, and everyone's glomming on the Garfield. I had the first fat cat.
I think that when
but he wasn't Garfield.
When you're doing a strip that people are going to respond to, that's actually going to be funny. I think one of the things that I've always sort of understood is that humor actually sort of comes from the same place that I don't know, sadness or any of that sort of stuff comes from. There has to be, I think, a certain kind of truth that people can see in whatever it is. I think Gary Larson, for instance, who
Yes.
did Far Side. I remember I forget who it was that was telling me this, but Gary Larson couldn't draw to save his life when he first started. When he sent his work into, it might have been Amy, because I think he sent stuff into United Media maybe, but I can't remember who told me this, but that his first cartoons, he drew so badly that when he had a bear, he would actually draw a little arrow to it and write bear, so it was a bear. but the joke was so hilarious, and it was just so dead on, like hitting whatever note it was hitting, that whatever truth it was identifying, that everyone went, whoa, we got to have this. I think like Bill Watterson does the same sort of thing, or did the same sort of thing with Calvin and Hobbes. There's that kid with the imaginary friend, and the
Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, Calvin and Hobbes, because and what's funny in that is a lot of times it would end up spoofing some Buck Rogers-y sort of thing, like from a kid's point of view.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think there's a certain element of truth that you have to kind of like, people go, oh yeah, that's right.
Right.
There's another example of a strip that didn't necessarily have to be funny in every strip to be a good strip. I mean, a good example I remember was a strip where he's playing on a sports team, and he ends up kicking a goal or something into his own net, and the kids just kind of rip him a new one, and he's just like, come on guys, it's just a game, and they're just like yelling at him and just telling him it's only a game when we're winning, you jerk, and this, that, and the other thing, and he's just kind of walks off the field, and they're making fun of him. And in the last panel, he's looking very sad and hands in his pocket, and he says to the coach, he goes, I don't think I could be on the team anymore. I think I have something like I have too much team spirit. And he goes, and the coach is just like, okay, goodbye, quitter. And he's just like, ow.
Yeah.
Because I can remember, I can remember going through that. I can remember being bad at sports. I can remember, but it's just like he nailed it in a way that just kind of, or even there was a whole strip of Calvin, tending for, I think it was like this dying baby raccoon, and it was just such a sad strip, and you just it went out of its way just to not tell a joke, not tell a gag.
Well, if you think about it, Calvin and Hobbes is actually a very sad, depressing strip about a little kid whose home life is so horrible he has to imagine.
Yes.
He has fun with his talking doll. And you realize that if he's spending this much time imagining all this stuff, it's like he doesn't want to face his horrible real life. His parents are probably about to get divorced, and he has no other friends.
Yeah.
It never
but he's
occurred
got
to
a
me that his
talking
parents were getting divorced, Bob. Goodness.
Oh, well, yes.
It's funny, like with Peanuts, the very first Peanuts strip almost set that rather dark tone that, it's like it was unprecedented. First panel, you see Charlie Brown walking down the street. It's in 4 panels, and the syndicate said we're going to have 4 square panels so people can stack, the square. So he shows how the syndicate wanted Peanuts shaped this way. But anyway, there goes Charlie Brown, said Shermy to the little girl next to him. Good old Charlie Brown in the second panel. Yes, sir, there goes old Charlie Brown. 4th panel, Shermy looks, how I hate him.
Yeah.
This is not Alan Mullen. I mean,
a lot of those early ones.
Yeah. People said,
you want to read that again the next day.
And it's like, what is going on here? This was unprecedented in strips. Now you have this slightly edgier tone, but Schultz knew that, humor, like the comedy, it's on the ragged edge. Something very tragic or very sad is on the ragged edge of being funny.
Yeah.
And again, it would resonate. That's why for me as a kid, it's like, I'm looking at these strips and it's like, wow, everyone's making fun of Charlie Brown. And then he's so depressed, he turns on his radio in his bedroom.
I was just thinking of that one.
And what is more enlightening than the sound of little children's laughing? And the last panel shows him stomping on the radio. That's it. That's the last panel. But wow, it's like Schultz can be, he can be a scream, but it's also he hit a nerve. He hit a nerve, and I think it's that part, as you're saying about humor. It's like comedy is when I slip on a banana peel, you laugh. Humor is when.
Well, Mark and I both used to teach the history of comics, sequential art. Comics classes, And when I would get to Charles Schulz, like at a certain point in the class, and I just saved pretty much the whole day to talk about Charles Schulz.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I get it. It's this little bald head kid and his like wacky dog and his hateful friends. I'm like, well, let's just see if you get it. And I would start showing this. I would have a whole bunch of strips I picked out very, intelligently to demonstrate how he took that concept and went all over the place with it. Charles Schulz wasn't just good at drawing like little kids and dogs and stuff. He was a genius psychologist.
Absolutely.
He of course he needed to see one himself, but it's like he got that kids were messed up, that parents were messed up, and he was like, I have so many freaking things I could draw comics about. I'm not even sure where to start, but I'll just start and we'll just and it was a whack, just compared to any other strip out there. That Charlie Brown was just different, but he did make it. He was like, it's so wild and crazy and weird. It's going to blow people's minds, and yet it's just a simple little strip.
Exactly.
It's not like, well, I'm going to draw this like I'm from Robert Crumland. We got it's like a crazy little kid with a mind warped imagination. This weird little dog that's got rabies. No, they just kept everything nice and normal and safe for cartoons and commercials and NASA missions. But if you actually read him over the 50 years he was drawing him, he kept changing and adding new characters and going on to new themes. He was a great cartoonist.
Absolutely.
There's an interesting thing about strips too, because like since they appear in the newspapers, obviously they have to be G-rated. I mean, anybody can read them. Little kids, old people, everybody in between. And so I think it's really interesting when because I remember having these things where you couldn't like with the Tarzan strip excuse me, Tarzan couldn't do certain things that like in his Burroughs books, Tarzan like kind of murdered people and all kinds of things. You couldn't really do that in the strip, and so it kind of limited it. But I always admired people like Charles Schulz, who could kind of like lay very deep things between the lines. And so, it's there and there's some strong implications of certain things, but you don't really see it. I mean, you could read the whole thing and miss all that.
Right.
But for people who are, sort of perceptive and looking at that and thinking about it, it's kind of has this other layer of meaning or something.
And that's what it was like when you're teaching the kids how to draw comic strips. They're like, okay, where does the word balloon go? And where does the background go? And how many do I was like, it's going to be a little more complicated than that, because you could, if you can draw your strip in an hour, or maybe it takes you 8 hours to get it done. And you're like, wow, look at my comic strip. I got another one done today. I'm like, okay, now let someone read it. And does it work? And sometimes they did work. They were very funny. And then other times they weren't. And it was like, well, what did I do wrong? And I'm like, there's just something about you that isn't funny. I know you apparently want to be a cartoonist, but you're really good at the art side of it. If you had someone else come up with the ideas, you could really bang out a great looking comic strip. But you are not, apparently, at least at this point, capable of coming up with an idea that's worth drawing. And I'm telling you, you're going to get an A in the class. You got no problem. In terms of the actual amount of work done, you've done a great job. You're just not funny, and it's not even cute. It's not adorable, or parents aren't. Have you seen the latest the Doo-Hoo-Hoo strip? Oh, I love that Doo-Hoo-Hoo strip. It's just so beautifully drawn. It's like, no, they either laugh at it or they don't, and then they talk about how it was drawn.
Yeah, because when I think about this thing about syndicates, you have to answer to an editor, and to also, not only that, but to the editors of the paper and your subscribers. Because again, even like with Schulz, it started off with a bang. It started like about 14 papers, and it grew into the success it did. But for a while, the syndicate said, first of all, we're imposing this title Peanuts on you, which he absolutely hated to the day he died. We're imposing this 4-grid format for the dailies. Third, you don't own the car. Finally, I think he managed to get enough pull at the United Features to say, listen, either you do it my way or I'm pulling the strip. But again, to consider that a comic artist or a cartoonist has to answer to so many people, to the readers, to the newspaper who subscribes to it, to the syndicate editor. Well, you must know what it's like yourself, Mark, with the scripts. You have to answer to the editors and so forth and still manage to please an audience and also do something you enjoy. I mean, that's why I see guys like Pat McDonald doing Mutts and other strips and how they're doing, the work was there. But you have so many levels above you before it finally gets into print. How do you, get through all of those hoops and still manage to get it, the strip across? That's what I really find amazing about the.
One of the things I used to do in my classes is I'd go, okay, well, now that we're critiquing these in class, everybody try to put yourself in the mindset of having written and drawn this comic strip. Not that you did. This is your fellow students' work. But if you were looking for comments, is there something you see here? This guy doesn't know a whole lot of words because he can't spell them right. Oh, I'm kind of bad at that. I'm like, ooh, might want to make sure your words are spelled correctly next time. And in fact, maybe have correct grammar every now and then.
Or an editor.
And then word balloon placement is important. You'd have word balloons in weird places, so you'd read the comic strip in the wrong order because you're reading word balloons that you shouldn't read first. And that kind of, the basic mechanics of doing a comic strip. You can go, oh, you got all that stuff. That's an A. It's just you have nothing worth writing about, So you need to work on that. But we try to help him. Sometimes it could be the question of like, what's the same basic joke, but use these words. Or heck, in panel 3, just leave it empty. You lost the joke in panel 3, but in panel 4, we kind of come back to it. So how about we get rid of the words in panel 3 and go from panel 1, panel 2, that's the problem. In panel 3, we think about the problem. In panel 4, we end it. We go, oh, hey, good last panel. Because you're like, well, it's a 4-panel strip. It's got to be 4-panel. Okay, well, make panel 3. They're just both thinking. He goes, my butt. I don't know. But whatever you can actually get away with in the newspaper. It was okay. Well, if not that, what if we just change some of the words in some of the other panels? And sometimes we could rewrite the strip where it's the same basic joke, we just tell it slightly differently. And they're like, hey, that's actually pretty good. I'm like, well, we're trying here. You might just need a partner that you can show your ideas to, and then he helps shape it into an actual comic strip that can be published.
Speaking back on the Peanuts and kind of a personal note, my wife's great uncle was Larry Ruttman, the guy who was the head of United Features when Schultz was doing Peanuts, and who was the guy who got Schultz the job.
Interesting.
So every Christmas, Sid's family would get a cheese wheel from Uncle Larry.
Oh.
or a cheese basket from Uncle Larry, I think it was. I'll probably be.
I wish someone sent me that.
I actually invited Charles Schultz to SCAD one time. Back when we first started doing Comics Art Forum, I don't know, 95, 94, I don't know, somewhere in there. It was
92.
It was back when Schultz was still alive, but at any rate.
Oh, it was 92, 93.
Okay, so it wouldn't have been 99.
Well, I mean, because I got his contact information from people. It had to have been when I was doing Tarzan, because I got the information from my editor up there, because she was also old Sparky's editor. So at any rate, I wrote him a nice letter inviting him and everything, and I discovered that what was his address? It was like 52 Snoopy Street or something like that. I mean,
they're changing the names of the streets for Charles Schultz.
Yeah, the streets were all named for Charles Schultz's characters, like wherever he was. And he wrote me a very polite letter back, and, which I still have somewhere around here, and signed it and everything, and said, thank you so much. I'm sorry I don't really travel very much right now these days. And, he had some very nice, but he was very nice and complimentary about the program at SCAD and everything. But then, and so I was talking to Amy, Amy Lago, who was the editor that gave me his information. And I said, wow, this is so cool. He actually wrote me. I was expecting to hear nothing. I was expecting the guy was like, he's an important guy. Who am I? He doesn't know who I am. So, but he was very nice, very polite, got back to me. But then when I said something to Amy about it, she said, "Oh yeah, he probably had his staff write that up, and they do that stuff." And I was like, "Don't tell me that."
No, it's not true. It's not true.
No, I choose to believe that he actually sat down at a typewriter and typed up a letter to me. So
early on, he would do that stuff. All I could think of is like the letter he sent the little girl who hated the character Charlotte Braun, with the picture of Charlotte Braun with the axe in her head.
Yeah.
Saying, if you
right.
if you don't mind, if you don't mind the death of a child, that's fine by me. Something to that effect.
What a guy. Mommy, look at this letter.
Back when we used to invite people to Comics Art Forum for SCAD, it was interesting because I remember the way you would get certain people to come would be you'd nail down one really important person, and then everybody else would want to come visit too.
Charles Schultz would have been a good number one. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh gosh.
That would have been a real coup, but it just didn't work. But I did I got a hold of Jack Davis one time, and this is just kind of fun. This has nothing to do with comic strips really, but just speaking of talking to people, and I called him. I used to sit and kind of cold call people. I didn't, we didn't have the internet in those days.
Yep.
And most of the time you get somebody's answering machine, and they'd get back to you eventually or not or something. But when I called Jack Davis's number, he answered he was the only person I ever called that didn't have an answering machine. He answered his own phone and said,
Wow.
"Hey buddy, what can I do for you?" And I just wanted to sit down and cry. I was just like,
I hope I know you.
Oh, what you could do for me, Mr. Davis. Let me just start in. But he was very nice about it. He did end up coming to SCAD. He was just down in
Which, of course, it turned out you were calling St. Simon's where I live, because he lived just like a few miles down the road from me, which I had no idea.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So, years later, a couple of years later at one of his, because he came to SCAD like 2 or 3 times, and I ended up taking him some artwork back to his house, and he's like, "Oh, it's down the north end of the island." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And when I went into Jack Davis's garage, he had so many original comic strips from all these cartoonists, like Prince Valiant originals, Charles Schultz originals, some Flash Gordon stuff, Dick Tracy, it was just all stacked up in his garage. He's like, "Well, I'll have to die before my people get a hold of all this stuff." But it was just, I could just I'm holding a Charles Schultz. Oh my gosh. And he's just, say, "Hey, yeah, well, it's stuff to look at before you die, I guess," which would be a few years later. But yeah, he was a great guy. We call him like the gentlemanliest guy that ever came to SCAD, or something like that.
Yeah, most definitely.
He was just all manners.
Yeah.
Magazine,
can somebody get me a sweet tea?
He worked for Mad Magazine, right? Just so I get my stories right.
Yeah, well, and DC Comics and
That's right.
The TV Guide cover. Yeah, he was everywhere.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Magazine cover.
Yeah, worked for Kurtzman. I guess they did this. Arnold Roth, Jack Davis, and Harvey Kurtzman. They worked on a publication called Humbug, which was like this collect.
Oh yeah.
And after Kurtzman left Mad, it's like, we first went to a magazine called Trump, which you have to bankroll. And Hefner said, I gave Harvey Kurtzman an unlimited budget, and he broke it. It's like, and they lasted 2 issues. It's a beautiful, he published magazine. Jack Davis is in there, and then again, Jack went over to Humbug because he and Kurtzman were close friends from DC. But Jack Davis, he's just amazing. The cross hatching alone, and this is more sensible. He's just one of my favorites. Just outstanding in everything he's done, and he's so. I think Robert Crumb visited him once, and he said Jack actually had, it was like Ernie Bushmiller, 5 drawing boards up in his attic, and he'd go from one assignment to the next because he was so heavily in demand. He was just working like crazy, and he would finish like coloring one and start sketching another and inking in. Then he would just go from table to table, and he just will just work like crazy. But what a great guy! What
Well, here in the area where I live on St. Simons, Georgia, about an hour from Savannah or Jacksonville, and if you go to a restaurant, it's probably got a Jack Davis sketch on the wall.
Oh my God.
Or if you go to get your tires fixed, it's got a Jack Davis, original piece of art on the wall.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go, so I see Jack bought books here, or Jack bought his pants in this store, because he gave you a sketch in return. It's like he owns this area. Well, I mean, he's dead now. He died a while back.
Yeah.
But his presence is everywhere.
Yeah.
But thanks to his amazing, everybody knew his. I don't know that guy's name, but I freaking know his artwork. That guy's fantastic.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, we've talked about Peanuts a lot in this, and I feel like that was like the first comic I got into. But I think a lot of it had to do with the specials too, because I mean, it was something as a kid you'd watch, and you could follow along. Whereas at 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 or 5, you don't necessarily know how to read. But as I got older, I found maybe Garfield for a little while, then later Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County. But there was a lot of strips I loved that were ones that my dad kind of got me into, like Terry and the Pirates or Crazy Cat, and of course Walt Kelly's Pogo.
Oh yeah.
As well as Lee Falk's The Phantom. Going around the room again, it's a lot. Are there any other strips, comic strips, as a kid that you guys found that really influenced you as either a writer or you loved as you were growing up?
Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby. As a comic artist, I remember going, who do I got to emulate to, eventually work at Marvel and DC Comics? And it was freaking Jack Kirby, because he was so insanely, over the top action. But he was also incredibly his own person. He wasn't ripping off anybody. Everybody would look at his work and go, how the hell is he? What are these muscles? They're not muscles. These aren't people. They're like these sculpted shapes. And somehow Kirby makes it work. And
Absolutely.
It wasn't necessarily that I wanted to draw like Kirby. I wanted to think like Kirby.
Have his energy.
And say, I want to just sit down and just whip out something, and it's easy because it's like whatever I say goes. And he'd make it work. And I remember when I was just a kid, and he did the comics at DC, the Fourth World comics, where he's introducing Darkseid and Orion and all these people.
Yeah.
That was I was like, what in the world? This guy, he's been at Marvel for like 10 years. He comes over to DC and he just hits the ground running with his own like private comics company, within DC Comics. And it was this incredibly gorgeous, insane concept, which didn't sell as well as they'd hoped. And it was a bad time for DC, and they all got canceled. But it made its mark, and now there's like a movie coming out, and the characters have been around all the time. But I mean, Jack Kirby, he was the guy that co-created the Fantastic Four, Thor, the Avengers. I mean, he was everywhere. And so I would nominate Jack Kirby as my that guy. Woohoo! Made me want to draw comics.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was doing like one of those I was doing one of those comic book trivias once, and they were going around the room saying, "Who created Captain America?" And I'm just sitting there, and the kids are going like, "Stan Lee." And they keep on saying Stan Lee. So I wasn't going to answer. Finally, I raised my hand. I said, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. I think I won a T-shirt.
Yeah.
So, anybody else?
Well, hey, you proved your knowledge.
Yeah.
No, it took Mark a long time to learn how to read, so he didn't.
It did. No, I knew how to read before. I don't know. Anyway, the point is, but where I learned how to read is from like the Sunday comic strips. Man, we used to sit around and wait on those. Like, we'd fight over. My brothers and I would fight over. We'd literally fight over them. They grab them and run off, and I'd have to chase them down. But the things in there at the time, like the Sunday funnies they were huge, and they were in color. And things like that I really liked were like the Phantom and
I love the Phantom.
The Phantom was just great. I mean, that dude in the purple outfit, I mean, I thought that was the coolest. I used to read things like Steve Canyon. I used to like Steve Canyon.
I remember that, yeah.
I mean, I tended to like those stories that had the serialized stories going in them. I never really cared for, I don't know, Dagwood and Blondie and stuff like that. I mean, they were all right, but they didn't have the mystique of those, of some of those. Mandrake the Magician, you know, it's always something weird
Again, created by Lee
on,
Falk.
you know? Yeah, but another Lee Falk thing. I like Dick Tracy a lot too. Yeah. But Dick Tracy would do some really weird things that go to the moon and all kinds of.
Right, moon bait.
Yeah,
the garbage cans are flying around, and
Right, yeah.
It's cooled on in the
sometimes, sometimes when I think back on that, I'm like, did I dream that? Was that really in that script? But that stuff, yeah, I literally learned to read by, at least partially by looking at those strips, because I mean, yeah, you can figure out what the words were kind of by looking at the pictures, and then you get somebody to tell you what they were saying. So, oh well. That's all.
I was gonna say, Mark, back when you were talking about your first story for Gray Morrow in the Tarzan comic strip, there were the Neanderthals. You see, now, like in my neighborhood, those would have been cavemen. Neanderthal would have been above my reading grade.
Well, yeah, see, I'm not totally dumb.
No, you've come a long way.
I've come a long way since I, first started reading. I think reading is a good thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Brian, any other?
Go ahead.
Any other comics that kind of influenced you, or?
Oh, very much so. Well, we started with Banks, and when I was also a kid, I liked Pogo. I was always in the lower left corner of the Evening Gazette. I mean, Walt Kelly's artwork, even reduced as it was, even back then in the late '60s, was impressive. And then I also liked Moon Mullins, of all things, by Frank Willett.
Oh yeah.
And, Uncle Willie's got this, permanent, stubble on his face, and Kelly's KO sleeping in the drawer. It's not for nothing. Moon, by the way, meant moonshine originally. So, I mean, these are some that they're not movie finished characters, but somehow that strip just got me where I lived. But when I became a teenager, the guy that I really liked a lot drew for the National Lampoon. I'll show you. You probably remember him. It's Dirty Duck by Bobby London. And he drew.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I got to know the guy, and one of his biggest fans. And just that whole retro style, that 20s style that he had, just got me where I lived. But that opened the door again. So I went to the public library here in Worcester, and that's when I started getting all these histories on comic art and discovering people like Harriman and Seagar and Cliff Sterrett. And now, happily, a lot of that stuff's back in print more and more. Like there are some other comics. Well, one guy, was Milt Gross. Now, this guy, I'll just show you a spread he did. He's got this drawing style that you swear the ink is still fresh on the page. I mean, here's Milt Gross in action here. And you can get that there. It's like he's all over the place. It's like, this is the weather in California. Now, look him up sometime, because he did comic books, predated the movie King of Hearts by about 80 years. It was called Count Screwloose from Toulouse. Now, sure, he goes out of the insane asylum, sees how nutty everyday life is, and he springs right back into the insane asylum at the end of every panel. But Gross, he's having a blast at the drawing. You can tell this guy loves what he's doing. Then the comic books that he did in the 40s are even crazier. It's like, an explosion happens, and it's like a whole splash panel, with bathtubs flying out, and somebody writing a car ticket, and the cops writing the ticket, the car's being blown up, and he could not sit still for a moment. I mean, and I'm looking at a lot of this older stuff, and it's definitely not so much. Well, it's just, again, what can these guys teach me? It's like I'll see, like, what can I learn from a Milt Gross? Just the way he draws, he can get so much animation, and he was an animator back in the 1920s. He was so he got so much animation and life into a line. And well, I guess the challenge is, how can you do that again, given the dictates of the size of the area you're working in? I draw a Laurel cartoon. It's like 9 by 8.5, but it's going to be reduced by at least 50%. And will the reader be able to see this? Will it get the point across? Will the gag come across? Will the theme come across? So I'd say, again, Al Banks and Bobby London, and then just going off into a lot of older strips that, again, have been a big influence. I've just named like Harriman and Seagar, who was great at continuity. Seagar could, again, tell a story, and again, it ends on a gag, but it still carries the story forward. And Al Cap was amazed by that. He said Al Cap said his favorite storytellers were Chet Gould and Harold Gray, and he would recommend those guys to any cartoonist. And again, it's like what Cap wanted to do, end a gag, but still tell the story. How do you do that every day? And so I think Art Spiegelman even said the future of the comics is in the past. So if you look back at a lot of old strips, you can just see what these guys are doing. And like I said, there's a place called Sunday Press. Get their books. I mean, they're literally the size of a coffee table. But you will see like a whole strip in the right size, 14 by 17 of, say, a Crazy Cat or a Lionel Feininger strip or a Gina Hearn strip. And wow, I mean, that's when, when comics again filled the page. It's amazing.
Well, these days, when Spiegelman said that comics, you want to do comics, you got to look in the past.
Yeah.
But as Bret pointed out earlier in this show, it's like, well, now there's no newspapers, that are coming out today that are looking for a whole lot of comic strips. So all these kids are like, oh, when I come to the SCAD, I want to learn how to draw comic strips. It's like, for what paper?
Yeah.
Or what website? Because there's a billion websites that publish a billion comic strips online for like nothing.
Right.
And they're all like, well, maybe if people like it, I'll be picked up for a newspaper. Well, the newspapers are going away, honey.
Exactly.
So why? It's like if you're gonna do a comic strip these days, it's almost like, well, I'm just kind of doing this for myself, and it either works or it doesn't, and maybe it'll be a hit or it won't. But is it like an actual career? Not a very good one. Compared to, like 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago. It's like comics were all like, wow, comics, woohoo!
Yeah, right.
But it's like the whole format for that has disappeared.
Oh, yeah.
It's like people, they're not buying books, and then they're not buying comic books, they're not buying newspapers, which don't have the comic strips in the first place. And if you did buy a newspaper, for like $1.50 for a single daily newspaper, and you go to the comic section, and they have like these teeny tiny little comic strips that are like the size of a postage stamp, and you're like, why were these? This is art. If they were printed at a size you could actually read them. It's a lot better looking. But then, so now a lot of people go, oh yeah, well, I need to think like that. So they do comic strips that are gonna be okay looking at the size of a postage stamp. So there's hardly any art there in the first place.
Right.
It's because it's like, well, it's all going to get shrunk down and disappear. It's kind of depressing when you think about it.
Right. I mean, King Features get 6,000 strips a year. I think they select maybe 2 or 3 at most. And again, even like I work for the Gannett Media newspaper chain, and we were even told, you want to see, the future of print? Look at the obit section. I mean, again, print readership has really gone down. So how that means for comics, being online, I know there are other sites that have those, like I think Andrews McNeil and so forth. I just don't know about that myself. It's like I feel like I'm a bit of an anomaly doing what I am doing on a Sunday paper. But it is a hard way to make a living. Was it Mark?
Actually, you guys just answered my next question about. I was going to ask, what are your thoughts on the future of comics? With the dwindling size, newspapers pretty much being ghosts of their former selves. What do you feel, in people doing like web comics or comics on Instagram or on social media of any sorts? I mean, as a profession, do you think there's any future in at least comic strips?
I don't think. I mean, it's like Brian and Bob are saying. It's very difficult to do anything with a comic strip. I mean, in order to make really hard to make a living. It was, well, I'll be frank with you, it was always hard to make a living doing comic strips.
Oh yeah.
Unless you sort of won the sweepstakes. I mean, really well-known people were doing fine, but then for every one of those people, there's probably 1 million people that didn't make it. That are trying to do the best they can. So I don't think it's ever been that easy, because I mean, part of the thing back when I was in Tarzan, to be really honest with you, I wasn't being paid very much to do those strips. I mean, it's like $50 a week or something.
Holy mackerel!
Okay, I probably shouldn't say that, but at any rate, too late. I already said it. But the point is that it's like
and that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, that was 1990 $50. Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I mean, it's like so there's a threshold, where somebody becomes like one of the really famous, like Charles Schulz sort of creators, and even Charles Schulz, a lot of his stuff ended up going for, what was the insurance company that his character?
MetLife.
MetLife, yeah.
MetLife, yeah. So I mean, like Charles Schulz was, a lot of his stuff was being licensed to do other things than just be the comic strip. And so I think that a lot of people nowadays are, because it's relatively easy to do a web comic. I mean, people are doing a lot of web comics. I think people doing a lot of self-publishing because it's relatively easy to do a lot of self-publishing these days too. And there's good and bad in that. I mean, if you do something like that and it really does well, then you're the one's going to be reaping all the profits if that is the case. And you don't have, like Ryan was saying before, all the people you have to go through in order to get approval and, all this to put something out. You don't necessarily have to do that anymore with these web comics and with things that you're independently publishing. But of course, there's good and bad in that as well, because it means you better be editing yourself because
or having a really good editor.
Yeah.
What's that?
Or having somebody who's a really good editor.
Or have a really good editor.
Yeah.
Or have a really good have somebody that's looking at the stuff and helping you with it. So I think there's a future to be had, but I don't think that it was ever an easy profession.
No.
Exactly. And I think
it wasn't that it was necessarily easy. What I meant was that it made sense. Like, you're like, oh, I know how to become a comic strip artist. I need to do a certain number of comic strips, put them in my portfolio case, and go up and meet the editors or send it in to this guy or that guy, and they'll either say yes or no, or so if they say no, then I give up and I'm not a comic strip artist. If they say yes, I start working out comic strips. These days, you're like, who do I even send stuff to? Who's looking for anything, and where are they going to publish it? It's like these places don't exist.
I think
it's a lot harder.
Well, I think a lot of people are, they have another job kind of, and I know a lot of the kids at SCAD these days are really into things like storyboarding and and doing art for video gaming and animation and things like that are really kind of big. And of course, if you do a book of some kind that, I don't know, some giant Hollywood production company wants to make it into a movie or something, then I think a lot of people are hoping for that on some levels, which is I don't know, I guess that's good, but it's a little sad in a way too. But I think that there's I think that comics, the people that create comics, comic books, comic strips, have always had to be kind of prepared to be diverse, to kind of diversify what they're doing. They also do other kinds of art, I don't know, greeting cards or whatever else you have to do, in order to get by. But
so ideally, you better be fast and you better be quick. It's like but that's the same thing. Yeah, I'm saying do it fast. Like the longer you're taking to do that one individual 3 or 4 panel strip, that's you're putting off your potential earnings down the road. It's like, well, it's been a couple of weeks. I've got 2 strips. 2 strips in a couple of weeks. Lord, you ought to be getting at least a couple a day.
Yeah.
Oh, really? That much? Well, you're the one that wants to be a daily, Monday through Saturday and then a Sunday, larger shit. It's like if it takes you 2 weeks to get a couple of strips, give it up.
Yeah.
Well,
find something else to do.
Yeah. Greg Smythe, who drew Andy Capp, used to set a kitchen timer. He would make himself come up with a gag every 20 minutes. So inside of like 3 or 4 hours or so, he would have a whole week worth of material, and then he'd be set. But again, he was well, you know, the strip. I mean, it was a phenomenal success. But again, he had no bones about it. He had to hit a deadline for the Daily Mirror, and he had to get this material out no matter what. So he was very disciplined about it, and somehow he pulled it off, you know, and that's how we got to start.
And you never know, because I used to tell people, like, I don't have the clue to tell you what to do to get more strips done. I just know you got to do it. But
Right.
we'll go over a few right here in class. Let's come up with some ideas. And we'd have an idea like, well, let's just come up with a crazy, wacky ideas to come up with. Open up a dictionary or an encyclopedia or watch some TV.
Just roll back.
And you know, and just let's pay attention to what people are saying and go, I'm going to pick something from this dialogue and make a joke out of it. You know, it's like, that guy just, you know, he just mentioned blah, blah, blah. I could do a whole strip about that. Or it might be a whole couple of weeks worth of strips about that one thing that came up on TV. And it's like, oh, well, okay, I would never have thought of doing that. And the same concept might not have worked for another student. I'm like, okay, well, you need something else. But you all have to have something where you're going to come up with ideas, and then you better figure out how to draw them quickly or change your style.
Yeah.
You know, because you got to get it out there fast. And then I remember it was like in the 70s when I was still a middle school kid. I was looking at comic strips in the newspaper, going, man, they all kind of suck looking. You know, because I would read these old reprints, you know, like you are. You know, the old Crazy Cat and Dreams of a Rabbit Fiend, you know, and Little
Crazy
Nemo
Cat all spoken as like
all
Yiddish puns almost.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. But I mean, you know, it's by the 70s, they were already adapting to the tinier spaces in newspapers. And I was like, man, there's hardly any room to even draw anything in here. But you got to try. You have to figure out something that's going to make your comic stick out, and it's interesting. And say, oh, when I look at this guy, I don't even know the name of this strip. I don't know any particular gags, but I recognize that artwork because that guy, he draws some interesting, weird-looking faces or backgrounds or whatever. And it's like, okay, and I've got that, and now I got to come up with jokes. It's like once you come up with all the basics, then you can just whip out strips for a whole year. And then when they turn you down after a year, find another job. Yes, I just can't stress enough that a lot of people are kidding themselves and fooling themselves, because what they really are doing is like, well, I'm doing comics for me and my family that we can all enjoy or not enjoy, and they will never be published by anybody. And that's the majority of people that want to be comic artists. So you know, it's only a small number that are going to be able to get published on a website or in little paperbacks to say, hey, I like that book. I'm going to check that out. And hey, I like it too. I'm going to buy it. And you know, so you start seeing that book everywhere you go. And then you never know, that could suddenly fade away. And now those bookstores aren't carrying those comics because they're hardly carrying any comics at all anymore. It's a tricky job being a comic artist.
Bob, I wanted to bring up something you'd mentioned earlier, you know, mentioning to students, you know, the strip's not funny and them getting angry. You brought up a good point, because you're looking at the strip as a reader, and that's something they've got to understand, because if, you know, you as the reader are not finding this funny or not understand this, other readers aren't necessarily going to understand it either, and an artist needs to think of the readership as well. Well, I used to point out all the things they were doing right, where I was like, these are great looking figures, or I love the character's facial expression here. Really great sense of timing, you know, or whatever it was. And then I'd say, but you don't have a joke here. You just have people standing around talking to each other, and then there's a fourth panel where it kind of ends. But it's not a joke, an actual writing a joke. I was like, you know, when I would mention people like Jack Benny, I would also mention, now I don't know all their names, but trust me, watch the Jack Benny show, find a rerun of the Jack Benny show, and wait for the credits, and you'll see a whole bunch of writers listed. Oh, yeah. You know, it's like, that same would go for Bob Hope and all the other comedians, you know, whose names escape me. But once you became famous, then you could pay other people to help keep you constantly supplied with funny jokes.
And Charles Schultz was lucky enough to go, if I sit here long enough, something will come to me. I could just start drawing Snoopy right now.
Right.
And something on his face will make me go, well, apparently it's taking place in the sky. He's watching birds fly over. Now, why would this be funny? Oh, yeah, there's something I could do, but that's more for an underground newspaper. But I'll come up with something else. Yeah, we'll see. So he could just like fool around, draw his characters, and a joke would come to him.
Right.
And but other people are like, I need something to draw. And those people need to find a partner or figure out how to interpret their life through comics. I
think like what Brian was saying a minute ago, I thought, that for anybody who's trying to do this, I think, setting a timer like for 20 minutes and just doing something, because I think that if you can somehow stop being self-conscious about it and just, kind of do it. And I think that if you do that, you won't be second guessing yourself. Maybe you won't be trying to edit yourself while you're in the middle of creating something. And and also if you get one idea down, it will inspire a bunch more ideas most of the time. It kind of like suddenly branches off.
Well, I used to do this thing in my comics classes where I go, okay, we're going to draw comics today, everybody. And they're like, Ray, tell us how they work. I'm like, you know how they work. This would be like the very first day of comics. They're like, what? But you haven't, you got to tell us what's a word balloon and what's a panel. I'm like, no, I don't. You all know what a comic strip looks like, don't you? You do. So there's 3 or 4 panels. It's a daily newspaper comic strip. Now draw it. Okay, now here's how it's going to work. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to draw each panel. And at the end of the 3 minutes, I'm going to go, bah! And I'll draw the next panel. And I'll do that 4 times, and then we've got 4 panels.
Yeah.
And then we're going to see if any of you are really capable of drawing super fast. Just drawing without a pencil or with a pencil, and we use pens or modify the time of it. But basically, within a 2.5-hour class, I'm like, we're going to draw like 5 to 10 full strips right here in class today. Wow! And they could do it. And some of them would actually be pretty funny. But I'm like, well, we can't use that for a newspaper gag. It's a little more like for inside a college level art class gag. But at least it's funny. And then we'd have a whole bunch where I could come up with nothing. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to need more work. But then somewhere in the middle, we have a whole bunch of scenes like, wow, if I only had like 5 more minutes. I'm like, well, guess what? In real life, you will have 5 more minutes. You'll have a whole day to draw that comic strip or longer, but, like if you can draw a full comic strip in one day, that's actually finished and inked and lettered and it actually has a joke to it, that's enough, I mean, if that strip's actually working, so if you can go through this like timing thing, this is for you. It's just like you were saying, Mark, to me, it's like some people are going, oh, gee, I've got 15, 20 minutes. That's not, all I can think about is what I'll be doing after this class and what's for lunch and, whatever.
Well,
it could be an hour. I could say, okay, I'll give you an hour. And that was
creating
still
inspires
accomplish the same thing.
Though. I mean, creating inspires creativity.
Right.
So.
Oh, right. I like the best when I only gave them a couple of minutes. It's like you just go to it.
Yeah.
What I always hated about that show, the Great British Bake Off.
What are we getting?
No, I don't know.
Well, it's because they give them this time limit. There's always this time. I know they do it for the show, otherwise it wouldn't be much drama involved. But I mean, it's like make this great souffle and you have 15 minutes. Start now. And people just freak out and make a giant mess and but to me, that's okay. I mean, make a giant mess. That's fine. But you probably learn something from making that giant mess, and probably is going to inspire you to do something different next time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that just reminded me that the show you should watch if you want to learn how to do a good comic strip, even though it's not about comic strips. It's the old Dick Van Dyke Show from the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
Because it's where everybody in there, they're writers.
Right.
So they're throwing out jokes, left and right and up and down, and half of them aren't really working, and then there'll be one that actually kind of does work, and they're like, okay, we're keeping that one. And it may not be like they do that every single episode, but every now and then they'll have an episode in The Office where they're like, just, oh, well, we got to have one more joke. And they'll sit there and just, okay, he runs into a guy's car, and then the guy's like, well, do you have insurance? Well, no, but I got a gun, and I'll kill you if you try to, nah, that's too violent now. Okay, we'll go in a different direction. And that's the kind of thing you got to tell yourself, is like, if you're doing a newspaper comic strip, is this appropriate for the audience? Is it going to be funny? Could it be funnier if it happened to Charlie Brown as opposed to Lucy?
Yeah.
Like maybe you got an idea for a joke, but you're using it on the wrong character or the wrong characters.
Yeah.
Or even just that it's nighttime instead of daytime. So I'll change the background and it's inside instead of outside. Hey, this joke. I've saved this joke. This is actually a worthwhile joke.
Yeah, you got to have Maury Amsterdam on your shoulder. Maury Amsterdam here and Rosemary
that's
here.
It.
No Cooley in the background.
And what was the big guy? Was it Mel?
No Cooley, yeah. Richard Deacon, yeah.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, and he come in and go, you idiots, write something for the show. And
the movie My Favorite
we will.
Year. The movie
Rob
My Favorite
Reiner's
Year did something like that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything. Well, there are other shows like that.
Yeah, there's a
but that
Go
Dick Van Dyke show, because you've also got Dick Van Dyke and Maury Amsterdam, they're all being funny as they are going through. They're not just guys sitting at a desk writing.
Yeah.
They're making funny expressions and they're interacting with each other. You're like acting it out. And like, I just ripped that off and draw it in the comic strip right now.
Yeah. Right.
Cough, cough. Beep.
Actually, I was actually going to mention years ago, you did something very, very nice for me in a class. Because it was during a critique and I was just being eviscerated by this group of sequential art students. And it's just like, you kind of stepped in, you noticed this is getting a little mean. And you kind of stepped in and I was just kind of sitting there taking it because it was at that point where it's like, I'm just not going to let this bother me. But you kind of stepped in the middle. It's like, okay, let's move on now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you remembered it all these years later?
I did.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, I did that all the time, but I just figured most people weren't paying attention.
Yeah. Oh no,
but apparently you did. And I do appreciate that.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Well, because people used to tell me that like when I would do critiques, they're like, you only focus on like the cool kids. You have all these great things to say. I'm like, well, that's because they were the cool kids, And so pretty much I don't have to tear them to pieces.
Yeah.
Prove a point. I'm just going to say nice things.
Yeah. Right.
And but then we'd have other kids who are like maybe having an issue here or not getting treated fairly by some of the other students. Then I'd make a point of figuring out the best way to go about critiquing their work, so that they actually felt like, well, yeah, there was a reason, because I want to come back tomorrow and not feel like I'm wasting my time. Yeah. And in fact, just praising the really cool kids, I'm like, oh yeah, they came in the class already fully capable of doing this stuff. Yeah. They're going to the college program to like get proof of it. Yep, that's right. I have a college degree in doing something I've been doing since I was like 8. And now I'm really good at it. And I'm like, do you ever mention Bob Pendarvis? What? Is he one of my teachers? I barely pay attention to them, because I already know this stuff. But the rest of us are like, wow, this is all new to me,
Yeah.
So I always felt like I was going and teaching those kids and then trying to keep the really cool kids, from dropping out or going, Pendarvis guy, he's no fun. He doesn't talk about us enough. I'm like, oh no, I'll make sure to praise you guys in your awesome comic. But let's find things to talk about and praise where we can with everybody else who's still learning.
Well, you're also dealing with an age group. You're also dealing with an age group that was like 20 to 23-year-olds, and at that age, we all know everything. And we don't need to be taught anything.
Oh, I had a student one day. I was walking into the classroom, and Mark, do you remember this guy? His mom gave us grief. Like, she called up and says, "How dare you fail him this quarter?" or he didn't get an A or something. He walked in. I don't want to mention his name, but before I could go into class, he's standing outside the door. And he goes, "Bob, I just want to let you know how much I hated you and SCAD." And I'm like leaving, and I'm like, okay. So I just wanted you to know, because you might have thought I didn't like you. It's not personal. I think you're an okay guy. I just think your teaching sucks and you suck.
Wow.
And I hate this school. I think this whole program is a joke. And I was like, okay. Well, good luck wherever else you go. I've never heard from him again. But I walked in that class, and I'm facing all these students who are like, yeah, well, we know what he just told you because he told us before you got here what he was going to tell you. So, let's start class, Bob. And I'm like, yeah, we will, And then I had to just put that guy out of my head because I'm like, well, he's no longer going to affect me because he's not even here.
Exactly.
All I have to worry about is all you guys. But I'm not going to be worried about it. And he's fair with me. He wanted to get in his 2 cents right there in the classroom with me. I'm like, okay, well, you did, well, congratulations.
Exactly.
But I always figured for most of my almost 20 years at SCAD, I pretty much would take anybody on who had a problem with me because I'm like, explain what it is you have a problem with. Is it the fact that I tell jokes? Well, comics are about jokes, a lot of them. And it is, whatever it is, I'll respond to it and I'll give you all the chances to come at me. And I guarantee you I will justify my existence as the teacher in this classroom. And I never ran into someone who came out the better in a confrontation like that unless I just gave it to them. But I mean, yeah, it's like with Mark, you were teaching the writing classes, and didn't you ever have students every now and then that would give you grief, or to this day give you grief about, well, I don't even know why we have to have an actual class in writing. I mean, I think that's personal or whatever.
No, it was all love,
you're too old for me, Mr. Kneece.
I never had that experience. It was all love. All of my students just told me how much they
Damn
loved
you,
me.
Mr. Kneece. You've beaten me again.
A lot of them told me how much they hated you.
Oh, well, yeah, well.
I told that kid, I said, you wait for him outside the door. And as soon as you see him, you give him a piece of your mind.
Well, he did, and I took it. But no, I had a great.
Of course, there are always people like that. I mean,
it's always going to be.
But I think you have to kind of like think of the greater good. Whatever. You're not just teaching for one person. I mean, you're trying to reach a lot of people. So there's always somebody. So yeah, and that's with my books. I like to think when we did the Bristol Board Jungle, we were doing that for NBM, and so I was like, okay, basically he's letting us do what we want, but if he feels like stepping in, and he did every now and then, it was like, well, the publisher was also our editor, so to speak. But with my books now, I do whatever pops into my head. So I take a long time thinking about it and go, is that the joke I want to use, or is that the piece of art I want for this page? It better be, because I'm about to approve it and go on to the next page. And once I do that, eventually I have a book done, and I can look at it right now today and look at that. This Anna teaches people how to draw type books, and I can find all kinds of things I'd love to do over, but that's yesterday. I'm working on the next book and the next book after that. And that's what I always tell the students. It's like, never worry about stuff from these classes. After the 4 years are over and you're outside, and no one cares about the fact that you draw anymore unless you can find these people. And it's going to be hard to find a whole room of like 20 other kids who are wanting to look at your artwork. It's like, if you don't appreciate that while you've got it here at SCAD, well then, good luck when you graduate, because it's going to be that much harder. So I would tell them, like, I know it sounds silly that you actually care about your classes when you're coming, but I don't care if you get an A or an F in the class. I'm just going to do what I do. And I have a whole bunch of stuff that I know is important for you to understand. And I'll try to reach you, but if I can't reach you, I'll be like, well, that's another one gone to the world. And most people could figure that out and would give me stuff,
But sometimes they like play with me for like a quarter or two. They go, okay, Bobby, and I've had a couple of classes with you, and now I get it. Okay, so trust me, I'll be a different person this quarter. Okay, well, we'll see. And they would be. And I'm like, yay, he figured it out. And that was how I approached the teaching for like the 18 and a half years I taught there, was like to say, I'm going to let you do what you want and have fun with it and try to get the best out of you. But if I can't get the best out of you, that's your fault. You know, you're the one going to school and then going, I already know everything. I'm like, well, then why did you go to school?
Yeah.
You know, think of it as pleasing an editor or an art
Exactly.
director. It's like, well, you work for Disney now, and we have certain things we want to see.
Yeah.
So you need to learn how to please the guy directly above you, and the guy above him, and the guy above him,
Bingo.
or the girl.
Right.
You know, so that's how that goes, right, Mark?
Yeah. That's that sums it up, Bob.
Yes, I'm summing it up, by golly. Once again,
you
talking
need
about
to
me,
sum it up.
I
You
can't
keep
help it.
blathering on. Like what?
Well, you could always, any one of you guys can interrupt me. Just go
No,
ahead.
we can't. You're going
I'm
on
sorry.
and
I'm sorry.
on.
I'm not usually up on a Sunday afternoon.
None of us are.
Oh, well, that's fine.
Well, I had a great time though, Bret. Thanks for doing the podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for saying yes.
All right then.
No, this has been fun. Yeah.
So I know all three of you have books out currently, and I didn't know if you wanted to take the opportunity to tell the listeners what you have currently available and where they can find it. Start with Mark.
Well, yeah. My most recent book. I wonder if I have a copy of it laying around. Flying Humanoids. It's actually a prose novel, and I've been doing a lot more prose writing these days. Just kind of like letting myself go, you know.
And it's very good.
I don't mean in a negative way, letting myself go. But just you know, going in that direction. But yeah, so you can get that at Amazon. You know,
what's it called again?
It's called Flying Humanoids.
Got it.
Flying Humanoids, ladies and
Yes.
gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I told you I like you know, things like Dick Tracy and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, Flying Humanoids. Yeah. All right. I guess that's all I'll say on that subject.
Brian, where you have collections of Laurel out, and where can people get them?
Oh yeah, well, mostly you can probably find them. Well, there's only one place if you happen to be in the city of Worcester, Mass. It's at That's Entertainment, the world's greatest comic bookery. And this is the latest book. I'll see if I can get this in focus here. And never mind the backward print, folks. Just hold it in front of a mirror. It's Seeing 2020 with Laurel. So it's merely just a collection of you know, the Laurel strips and the like. But it's probably the best place to look outside Worcester County is online. I have a blog. It's called Sunday on the Block with Laurel. The address is laurelsunday.blogspot.com, but just Google Sunday on the Block with Laurel, and it's like this internet archive I have, like the cartoons from 2009 all the way to the present day. So remember, if you go there, you brought it upon yourself. But that's where all the Laurel cartoons reside, and probably the easiest way to see them, and I hope you enjoy them. But thank you for asking.
Bob, where can people find, you have books out right now, and where can people find them?
Amazon. But yeah, I've done various anthologies and stuff with former students. And I've been working on a series of books about a girl teaching other girls and 3 cats, a bird, a robot, and a ghost how to draw. And it's a series of, I wanted, when Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics came out, we had him at SCAD that year to be a part of our first Comics Art Forum, and he and Will Eisner got into it over several, panel discussions we did that weekend, but essentially everybody was like, yeah, comics, and everybody was like, man, that Understanding Comics it's like gangbusters. He's been working on it for years. It's out, and it's a huge hit, and it's right now, I think it sold like a zillion copies.
Mm.
Understanding comics, right?
Oh yeah.
Anybody here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wanted to.
There's the book. You guys got us to read when we were in college, along with the two Will Eisner books on scripting and comic book art.
Yeah, well, yeah, because we had comics and sequential art is a pretty darn great book in and of itself.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a comic book, and I was like, I remember as a student, before I even became a teacher at SCAD, I was like 3 years earlier. I was a student in the master's program, and I was like, I want to do a comic book about how to make comics. And I don't know, like 10, 15 years later, I got a chance to do just that with Mark Kneece.
Yep.
And it was for what's the name of that company, Mark?
NBM.
NBM was Terry Nantier.
Yes.
And we did the Bristol Board Jungle.
I remember that,
which I thought was a fun title because Bristol, that's what the comics are drawn on, and that was kind of like Blackboard. It's like Blackboard Jungle, so it's going to be, which is a story about a teacher teaching kids.
Mm-hmm.
And how wacky it is. So we did the Bristol Board Jungle, and that was not quite what I wanted it to be, but we tried. But I was like, yeah, I'm going to still do this eventually. And it took me another 10 years or so to figure out how I wanted to present it. And so I did the first one a couple of years ago at Dragon Con, and it was pretty popular. I'm not a giant hit, but it was pretty popular. And kids open up and they go, whoa, this looks pretty nice. And I've got a new one coming out this summer, also at Dragon Con. I keep mentioning Dragon Con because it's in the area I live. I live here in Georgia, and Dragon Con's in Atlanta, Georgia. And Dragon Con's been very, very good to me over the years. I found Mark Kneece there and Bo Hampton and various other people. And I've been happy to be a guest there for many years since I first went there in the late 80s or early 90s, whatever it was. But so I'll be premiering that at this second in this series of how to draw comics books. And what I'm doing is I'm breaking it up into, the first book was about drawing, just basic drawing. How does that work? How does that make sense? How can anybody learn how to draw? And the next book is about designing. Oh. And now you're actually thinking about it. I'm not just looking at a plant and drawing the plant. I might be altering how that plant physically exists, or maybe I'll add a background that does it, but it gets a lot more complicated than that. And then eventually I'll get into comics and illustrations and character designs, all that kind of stuff for future books. And so it's like I've set this goal of mine for my next 10 years. I'll be drawing these damn books because it takes me like 2.5 years to draw each book. But I think they look okay, don't they, Mark?
Yeah.
Oh, I got a copy right here. It looks great. And I mean, the last one was a successful Kickstarter fund. You're like a Kickstarter machine, Bob.
Well, I did a Jack Davis Kickstarter. I did my Kickstarter for that book. I also did a Kickstarter for a book with just kids doing their own comics, and it was like 400 pages of we did that, and I think that was all. I've done like 3 or 4 Kickstarters.
Is there any place people can find your books?
That failed miserably. Uber.
Oh.
Most of your books.
It was the first time I was. Well, the first time I was doing one of my Kickstarters for my how to draw comics type books, I just had never done a Kickstarter, didn't know what I was doing, and failed miserably at it. But the next time I did a Kickstarter, I had everything ready to go, by golly.
Where can people find your books right now if they want to pick them up?
Amazon, or I don't know where they'll find the Bristol Board Jungle. I doubt that's still in print. But for a number of years it wasn't it, Mark? It was like I bought a copy in England, or I bought a copy here.
The Bristol Board Jungle actually has traveled quite a bit since we did that. That was in 2004 or 5.
About 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was a while back, but I still run into students from time to time who say, I read the Bristol Board Jungle. I thought it was really great. There are a bunch of things that, like you were saying, that could be changed in it probably.
Well, for one thing, I didn't draw it. Yeah, we had students illustrate it as
Yeah.
a class, and I was always wanting to draw my own version, and have total control over it. So the Bristol Board Jungle was more like, well, this is what actually happened. Like, this is kind of like based on things we did at SCAD. The books I'm doing now are about a little girl who teaches these art classes to like cats and other girls and a robot
Anna,
and
right?
ghosts and all kinds of stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, Anna. And I have had that little girl character since I first created her for the school in a pamphlet promoting one of the forums for comics art, for sequential art. I think it was like the fourth or fifth forum. I drew an Anna comic strip as an ad for the forum. And then I started doing strips for the newspaper, the school newspaper, with Anna in it. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do stuff with her one day. I'll just keep coming up with stuff for her. And so eventually, I figured out exactly what I was gonna do. I just need to rearrange things. So, like with everything else, if you looked at like the origins of Anna, you'd go, what? You know, she looks totally different. Like, well, that's because I'm not a success. Yeah, but I'm working on it. Yeah, I've decided to let my actual drawing abilities show up for a change. Instead of being fast and quick and hopefully funny with my original comics, now I'm actually taking forever to draw every page.
Yeah, some of these new panels. Some of these new panels I've seen you posted online are just incredible. They were just like these wild, detailed designs and things happening in them that just look fantastic.
Well, I'm hoping they'll make an impression, because the first version of this book I came up with, I wanted to keep as the original Anna comic strip, which is drawn as if a kid had drawn it. And I thought, well, everybody will be surprised because it's like really got all kinds of stuff going on in it, but it looks real simple. And then what happened was nobody read it. So I thought, well, I need to come up with something else. I know I'll draw it better. And I knew that was going to take some time. I was like, well, I'm not currently teaching. I got time to draw, so I'll start doing this. Oh, does it hurt? Oh, drawing really, really hurts. And I don't leave out details. I'm not like a great artist or anything. I'm not like a Kirby or anything like that. But I have my own thing, and people, when they see it, they go, wow, this looks really cool. And it's like I have something that can be identified as Pendarvis-like.
It's unique.
And, yeah,
Bob,
in its
we should have.
way.
I wish we'd let you go first. I would have had a better gauge of how long I should talk about my stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was asking a question about. You heard all about Mr. Tarzan. Okay, yeah, I should shut up about me. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
that.
okay.
Yeah.
No.
But yeah, so go to Amazon. You can find my book on Amazon. Mark's told me to shut up, so I will.
I didn't tell you to shut up. I just said, hey, equal time. Let me see.
Connor, 20 minutes.
Let's talk about my novel again.
Well,
and Brian's got some more things to say.
Oh, no.
This is my big chance, Mark, and you're blowing it for me.
Oh, isn't that always the way?
Well, yeah. I guess it's all right.
Oh.
Beep.
That's been the relationship between Bob and I for years.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, we call it the Bob and Mark Show, or the Mark and Bob Show.
The Mark and Bob Show. You got that right. Yeah.
Featuring whoever else was teaching that time.
Well, we used to do shows at SCAD for their admissions department. They go, we got a whole bunch of families and teachers and stuff that want to talk to you guys. We're like, okay, Mark, you up for it? Let's go. And they go, what do you got prepared? And we're like, we're going to walk into the room, make it up as we go. So we never had anything prepared. We just walk in and just start blabbing.
Well, I was always sort of Laurel, and you were always sort of Hardy, so.
Well, all I know is, as long as you're talking about comics, it was fine. That's what they wanted to hear. We could make that stuff up off the top of our head. And that's the thing. To me, teaching, the great thing about teaching comics all those years, I never, except for the history of comics, which actually was about specific things, I never actually had to think about what I was going to do in the class the next day. I just walk into the class. And I go, well, let's see, everybody's got homework due. Let's take a look at it. And we make it up as we went. And I can say that, and people go, oh, you're lying, or you're just having fun with it. I'm like, no, because if you really are good at that, it's a whole class. And next thing you know, it's time to go. And I'm like, well, we'll continue from here tomorrow. And I do it all over again. And the students used to get confused because they're like, well, I feel like I should be given handouts, or like we should have an official textbook or something in this class. And I'm like, if you're paying attention and you're doing what we're supposed to be doing in today's class, you're going to be fine. Trust me. And years later, apparently I was right, because all these people, again, that are working professionally now will tell me, like, yeah, your class was the best, Bob, because like, you didn't make it boring, or you didn't have a bunch of things for us to memorize, or like write a report on, and stuff like that. You just like made us draw comics and we talked about it as we did it. And it was fun. We had a lot of fun and we did a lot of work.
I think, there were 3 classes that I walked away from that I learned a lot from. It was Mark's, yours, Bob, and Patrick Welch's were the ones that influenced me greatly as a student.
Oh, Pat
Yep.
Welch. Pat Welch.
Yeah, Pat Welch.
Yeah, he was a great guy.
He was.
I have to say, Bob was one of the best people I ever saw at doing critiques. Bob could walk in, put his finger right on what the problem with something was, and equally be put his finger right on what was good about something, and where it could go. And so I always admired that. I always thought that was a great thing that Bob did.
Why, thank you.
There were a lot of things about Bob I hated, of course.
Well, yes. Well, I understand.
But but other.
Oh,
Yep. Hello.
no, we're still here. Well, Mark,
I'm
Oh,
Brian,
sorry about
Bob.
that.
Well, Mark, Brian, Bob, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate this.
For the invite.
Oh, thank you.
Brian, it was great to hear from you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Brian. Good to meet you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much, and thank you for putting this together, Brett.
Yeah, sounds good.
No, thank you all.
And Bret, it was awesome little podcast.
Oh, thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Mental Suppository. This is Bret M. Herholz saying,
I knew I'd disturb you.
The Mental Suppository has been produced by Bret Herholz and Jamie Billings and distributed by M the Media Project. Theme music generously donated by Mr. B, the Gentleman Rhymer. Visit his webpage at gentlemanrhymer.com. We would love to hear from our fans. Email us at mentalsuppository@gmail.com.